Okay, so excited to introduce our community today to Michele Folan, a 26-year veteran of the health industry, coach, mom, wife, self-professed lifelong learner. I love this. Michele wants us to celebrate this time of our lives with honesty, wisdom, and a lot of humor because no one said we have to go quietly into this next chapter. I love it. Welcome, Michele.
Thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate you having me.
We're going to unpack some of what you said in there because I think there is this belief. You and I both work in this niche of moms and grandmas, going into this next season of life. And I know you from podcasting land. I want you to just fill our community in on kind of your career path and what landed you before I want to talk about your podcast because I love it. But what landed you here? It's not normally a straight line.
No, it certainly is not a straight line. And if you've got a couple minutes, I can explain how I ended up doing a podcast. But in January of 2020, I lost my job. And it was due to an acquisition restructuring of a company that I was working for. And I was like, oh God, I was in my mid 50s. I had never lost a job before. And so immediately you kind of panic. And then you say, okay, I'm going to regroup. But knowing that 6 weeks from that date, everything shut down due to COVID. So here I am, midlife woman, and I'm going into a full-on job search in the middle of a global pandemic. Interesting times, right? What happened during that time, and this is kind of where the health and wellness piece comes in, I had to kind of change things up a little bit. I had been a bit of a gym rat prior to that, lots of spin classes, that sort of thing. And so I did what everybody else did. I started walking. And I was walking a ton. And I mentioned this in my very first episode. I wore through a pair of running shoes for the first time in my entire life because I was walking that much. And I started listening to podcasts. And, when you're super busy with work and I was traveling a ton with my previous job, I never really had time to listen to podcasts before. But it opened up my world to, oh my gosh, this is kind of cool. And I found a couple that I really liked. But with that, Lindsay, came I think I just realized I needed a creative outlet of some kind. Yeah, I had theater background in my early years, but I realized something was missing that no job was going to fill. And one day I just thought, I think I'm going to do a podcast. And I know my family was probably looking at me like, what in the world? You're going to do a podcast? You don't know anything about it. I said, I know. It's really scary. You just do it, right? You did it and you figure it out. It's sometimes a little clunky, but you do figure it out. But I want to back up though, because the reason why I do focus on health and wellness, because I did spend 26 years in the health arena, primarily in the pharmaceutical industry and medical device. So that's really why I focus on the health and wellness piece. So I did find a job. I was gainfully employed in December of 2020. And then I kind of put the podcast on the back burner because I really felt like I needed to, give 110% to my new employer, right? Yeah. And so I managed to balance everything. I did finally launch the podcast in 2022. And as they say, the rest is history.
I'm loving this for so many different reasons, and I'm going to highlight them because I think our listeners need to hear. Do you care giving us your age one more time?
I'm 59. I'll be 60 in March.
Okay. because all of this took place in your 50s.
Mhm.
And you're not only navigating a new job, but you have these sparks of inspiration of like, oh, I can see myself doing this next project, this next piece of creativity. You're feeding yourself in a way that, like, I think a lot of women lose themselves. They lose themselves in a place of, I don't know what I love anymore. Like, I've spent all this time feeding my family's needs that we end up in this place that we forget how to treat ourselves to what we like. So it's just, you're inspirational to see you be able to do that, because it's hard for a lot of people. So I just want our listeners to take that and hear it and go, huh, I wonder if I allowed myself to think like that. Like, what would that come up with? It wouldn't have to be podcast, obviously, but what are you not doing that you used to love to do? You used to have a huge creative side.
Yeah.
And so you got to like find a new area in your life to put that in. So, and you mentioned this with celebrate this time of our life with that honesty, wisdom, and lots of humor. Have you always been a project go-getter, or was this again like a little surprising even to yourself?
I think I surprised even myself because I could say 20 years ago, I would never have done this. As we get older, we kind of stop caring so much about what people think. And it's such a gift. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It is such a gift to be able to say, you know what? If I fail, I fail. But what's worse than failing is saying that I never tried. And I think that is something that I am seeing with my guests on the podcast is as we start to dig into their career path and things that they're doing, women in midlife are doing some amazing things. And it's all that emotion and need was buried under everybody else's needs, like you were saying. And, you know, we've got 20, 30 plus years left. What do you want that to look like?
That's a long time if we don't like what we're waking up to every day.
Yes. And when I look at what you're doing in terms of your health and fitness coaching, we've got to set the stage now so that 80, 85, 90 looks darn good, right? But we need to fill the emotional bucket too. And I think that's kind of where I'm trying to open up people's eyes to doing both.
Right. All right. I want to take this opportunity just so our listeners can hear, because I think your podcast is amazing. It is called Asking for a Friend, and it's a midlife podcast that gets your health, wellness, fitness questions all answered by experts. And I think you do such a beautiful job of this. I personally have not showed up to one episode that I haven't gone, oh, that was so good. Where'd she grab her? Or where'd she, like, good job. And I definitely find myself, your menopause episodes or your gut health, I find myself going back and re-listening and taking notes for client purposes as well as my own personal purposes. But are you finding that when you show up to your guests, are you going, ooh, I needed this today?
Oh, absolutely. And don't think for 1 minute that I don't choose some of my guests based on the shit that I've got going on in my own life and my own body, right? I do get a lot of friends, acquaintances, listeners who will say, hey, what about caring for the caregiver? You know, because many of us are in that time of life where we're caring for ill or aging parents or, God forbid, a spouse. And so that was an idea of a friend / listener. So, you know, I love getting suggestions from other people because I want to make sure that my topics are relevant and things that people really want to hear about.
Yeah. You can tell that you ask those questions and you address them on your podcast, that you're so good about saying, hey, this was a listener question. Let's make sure to get this answered.
Thanks.
And again, so for anyone listening today, it is asking for a friend, which I had to tell my daughter. She was like, what's that mean? My 11-year-old. I'm like, actually,
yeah.
I like
Well, and here's the other thing, and you know this as well as I do, is some of that putting others in front of ourselves is part of that asking for a friend because we tend not to want to ask for ourselves. It's that service to others kind of mentality. And also, we oftentimes don't really know what to ask. We may just think, oh, well, this is just how it goes. I'm in my 50s and I have to put up with this because my mom did. Well, no. You know what? There are answers out there. And in a kind of weird way, I think women have been a little bit gaslighted into thinking that either it's in their head or you're just going to have to put up with menopause. There's nothing you can do. Just, suck it up, buttercup. That is not true. And women need to know that there are healthcare providers out there who care and who can provide the answers. Now, it's sometimes hard to find them because a lot of that menopause education and women's health education is either an elective in medical school or it's just not a real focus. And many doctors learn once they're in practice, they start to take more classes and pay more attention to women's health. But if you're not getting the answers you need, go find another healthcare provider is my advice.
I agree. And I think some of the fun of having two podcasters on here together and chit-chatting is that we are getting exposed to another level of medical care that's out there that we're not all privy to. So hearing you say it as well, like my guest brings something that maybe the average person would have to work a little extra hard on seeking out, that it might not fall into your lap with the current office that you're in. But I would highly encourage listeners today, if you are struggling in a certain area, Michele would be a wonderful resource, as well as myself, that if you're going, I'm hitting a wall here and I'm hoping for another answer, another professional who might be able to fulfill this, reach out to us, right? Like that's what we're here for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to connect people with healthcare providers or provide some resources where if you don't live in my town, I can certainly point you in the right direction if there's a resource that I know of, for sure.
Yes, no, and thank you for that. I want to talk about this because and thank you. I was so honored to come on your podcast. And we started to just touch base on alcohol talk. And then I remember when we jumped off, we were like, we should talk more about this at some point. This would be a good topic. And it's another good asking for a friend topic, because talk about a taboo. Most people don't. This is a tough one. It's a vulnerable topic. So,
yes, it is.
So why not today together? Open up this vulnerable space. Yeah. And you've had a little bit of a story in this area. Do you want to kind of spill the beans on that?
Yeah, I'm really happy to share this because there's kind of a lot to unpack. But back during COVID, I think well, I won't say we all, I don't want to speak for everybody, but here I wasn't working. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. So it really didn't matter if it was Monday, Tuesday, or Saturday. The wine was free flowing at my house. And I knew that by the middle of the pandemic, that first year, I was easily drinking 2 to 3 glasses of wine a night and sometimes finishing off a bottle by myself. Mm-hmm. And I got sick and tired of feeling sick and tired and started to become very sober curious, where I was following people on Instagram that were in the sober curious area. And I kind of felt like a voyeur almost because I just wanted to see what they were saying. I didn't want to admit that this was something that I wanted to fix, basically. Now, I would not say that I was an alcoholic. I will not say that I needed anything other than to just moderate. But moderation is really hard. So I had to change my mindset around alcohol. And I went through a 21-day reset with an online group. And that was great. And I think that's kind of what got me kickstarted on really wanting to hone in on this because the more research I did, the more I learned of what alcohol really does to us. It's a toxin, and your body treats it like one. And for instance, if you're sitting down to a meal and you're having your big glass of red wine and your piece of steak, baked potato, your salad, well, guess what your body metabolizes first? The wine. And so you've eaten this big calorie-filled meal and your body's not metabolizing the meal, it's metabolizing the alcohol. So that's the first thing. So from the vanity standpoint, I think all women need to know that. The second thing is the cognitive issues that, we already have brain fog and menopause, and then you're adding on alcohol. That's one thing. But the anxiety and the sleep are probably the two things that when I experience that on a daily basis, and people call it hangxiety, but when you wake up at 3:30 in the morning and your heart's racing and you can't fall back to sleep, that's pretty motivating to me. And, I did Sober October this year. And I will say the best thing about Sober October was the fact that I was having the best sleep of my life.
Yes.
Right. And if that doesn't motivate you and encourage you to give that a try, just 1 month, but you really need to give yourself a month because those first 2 weeks can be kind of weird as your body's kind of adjusting. And even at that point, I was not drinking every night. I, wouldn't drink during the week, may have some on the weekends, but even the weekends, my sleep was getting disrupted. But I'm at the point now where I don't have to have 2 or 3 glasses of wine to disrupt my sleep. I can have 1 cocktail, 1 glass of wine. And so that's where I am now, is that I really don't want to drink. And like I went to a Christmas party the other night, did not drink at all. Have a couple events this week with friends, and I won't drink at all. I don't see it in my future. I'm trying to word this right. The sleep trumps the buzz from the 1 glass that I would even allow myself at this point. And 1 glass makes me feel like I've had 3. My body isn't metabolizing it the same way as I used to.
I've heard that from a lot of women too. Like it's not, they approach it because they remember the fun aspect with it, but instead it's leaving them like super flushed, and then they don't feel good actually after they drink it. And then back to your sleeping points. I appreciate you walking us through your journey though, because it is that. And if it helps the listener right now, maybe it's alcohol for you, or maybe it's food, because this transfers over into all of this type of thinking.
It does.
I like how it wasn't all or nothing for you. And when I started listening, I have some Drink Less Lifestyle podcasts that I enjoy too. And it's very much this, you don't have to put yourself in this camp of alcoholic or non-drinker. There's gray ground, and most people live in the gray. And so then it's just like accepting that maybe you're just not happy with the amount that you're drinking. And for some people, that can be a bottle of wine. And for some people, it's a glass of wine a night. And like, you just have to be very self-aware of what's too much for you. And then finding that bigger purpose of why you care. And sleep, I'm hearing out of you, was one of your, like you said, it trumped a good night's sleep, trumps a glass of wine. And my guess is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like maybe a couple of years ago to say, I'm going to go to these holiday parties and I'm not going to drink might have not been in your vocabulary at that moment. Like, would you have had that confidence a couple of years ago to say that?
No, probably would not have. But here's what's interesting was the first, this has probably been a few years, but get together with my friends, just on a Wednesday evening. And I would show up with my tumbler, which would have soda water and lime in it because I just wouldn't drink. But everybody wanted to know what was in my tumbler.
Yes.
because I think there is a degree of some uncomfortableness for people because they want to know why you're not drinking because it
Mhm.
makes them feel a little vulnerable, I think, in maybe
Absolutely.
in their own life a little bit. But here's here's something else. If I were a smoker and I quit smoking, my friends would all be really excited for me.
Mhm.
But when you quit drinking, you don't get that same congratulations and support. So and it's okay. It's okay. You know, it I'm all right with that. Just respect it, I think is really what I'm asking for.
Right. Yes, and that's a whole nother thing to navigate, right? That like now we've got emotions coming with social situations. But again, food's like that too. When somebody wants to order a dessert and their friend's like, fine, it ruffles the waters there on like, well, why aren't you having a dessert? Or should I not be having a dessert? Same things. And then even when we get eating under control or where we feel really good, because if we do have that dessert, it buzzes us. We don't like how we feel. That there is the emotional component of, oh, it's already hard enough for me to do this, let alone if I feel like my family's judging me or my friends aren't on board. So again, we'll give you the huge congratulations on your drinking journey. And
Well,
that,
I like your
yeah,
food analogy though, because I didn't really think about that, but there are some parallels between food and alcohol. It's serving something not just in our tummies, it's your brain and has that, it satisfies something. But here's I do want to say this, Lindsay, that when I go out to dinner and if I don't have two glasses of wine or a cocktail like I would have in the past, I get dessert. I'm like, shoot, why not?
I know.
But one of the other things that just want to encourage people, if you kind of are on the fence about your drinking journey, if you're in that gray area, because that's definitely a term that they use is gray area drinker, is your skin. And a lot of that improves, might drop a couple pounds. There are some other things. Again, it's the vanity side of things, but it's really super important. If you listen to Dr. Andrew Huberman of Huberman Labs, he has a really fantastic episode on alcohol that everybody should probably listen to.
We'll
It's
put that
pretty
in the show
convincing.
notes. Yeah, it's funny whenever we get on a journey like that, and most of us aren't ready to hear it if we're not ready to hear it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a health piece that can sound scary in one season of life. The further we're along on the journey, we can hear it and just put it in as another motivator.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I just want our listeners to kind of just assess where you are in your journey and what emotions all this stirs up. And is it knocking on your heart to just, I love that word you kept using, sober curious. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think we can be sober curious. I think we can be yoga curious. We can be, like
Yeah.
insert anything into our life that we're like, I would like to see me as this person in the next couple of years. And what would that look like for me? And then how do we get there? How do we slowly start to change? And I don't know about you. I think because we're both such big podcasting people, I dive in with podcasts. I literally like flood my ears. If I'm trying to change something, that's all I'm listening to until I kind of gather all the information I want. And then I feel like my brain space opens up and I can move forward. But what do you do when you're trying to make a big change in your life? What do you notice kicks in for you?
Well, I have had quite a few people on my podcast who have gone through their sober journeys because I think it's important to elevate them as an example of what people can do in their own lives. And so that I do. I know it sounds self-serving, but I will have people on the podcast
Your
that
community around you.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, why not? You know, I follow people on social media that I think will inspire me.
Yeah.
That's a biggie. And I think by telling people that this is what I'm doing, it creates accountability.
Yeah.
You
That's good.
know, it's kind of like when I decided to do the podcast, it's like you throwing the ball up over the fence and you can't go get it. But if I tell people, look, I'm not drinking tonight, then I'm not drinking because they're going to hold me accountable to it.
Well, and that's also a good point. It helps back to that emotional piece with friends or family. If we do preset the expectation, hey, I'm not drinking tonight, I want a really good night's sleep, then we get a lot less flack on the other end of, why aren't you drinking? Well, I already said it. Like you go and you don't get those comments. So that's just a tidbit for listeners as well. And that can be with food too. Hey, I'm going in and I'm ordering this off of a menu because my body's going to feel good after I do that. And I need to go get some work done after I leave our dinner party tonight. Like, you set people's expectations so that you don't have to deal with a random comment that comes out.
If you're on a fitness journey and letting people know that, hey, I need to get home early tonight because I want to do this class in the morning. That's the same similar type of situation. It's just put it out there.
Yes. And to your point of accountability, then we do it because we've already committed in our brain that we're going to.
At least we really want to. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Easier said than done sometimes. The other piece that I should bring up too is in terms of a health outcome with alcohol. Alcohol is inflammatory and it can increase your inflammatory markers. I got some blood work done recently, and I'd had blood work done in September of last year. So that would be 2022. Had it done again this year. And my nurse practitioner that I see said, oh my gosh, your inflammatory markers are way down. And that could also be that I'm eating a much better diet than I was even a year ago. That could have something to do with that, but the alcohol probably. So if you've noticed, like maybe your joints hurt a little bit the day after you've been to a party or something, there could be the inflammation from the alcohol.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And if we could all see our insides more, get more lab work done, I think that's so motivating. And I was thinking ripple effect, as you were saying, maybe food, maybe alcohol. When you worked on your alcohol, your food also improved. Like, there's normally this flow that it's like we just feel better, so then we do better. And that's a fun ripple effect. Things get easier when we can do that.
It really does. And if you notice too, say you've been to a party and you had 2 or 3 glasses of wine at the party, which is totally fine, no judgment. But the next day, right? No, and I want to make sure people understand that. I am not preachy. But if you notice maybe the next day, your food choices aren't quite as good. Maybe you're craving more carbohydrate. You're wanting that greasy taco. Or, remember college? The crap we ate the day after, breakfast food at noon and whatever. But I think there is something to that, in that your body is kind of trying to reset itself. And so you may crave things that aren't necessarily great for you.
Absolutely. And again, that is like a beautiful ripple that happens that you don't think about it till it's not there anymore.
No, you don't.
Oh, all of that just improved. Where is your favorite place to have people come find you?
So I'm on Instagram at askingforafriend_pod. I am on Facebook at askingforafriendpod. And there you can go on my link tree or my link bio, and you can get to the podcast from there. But the podcast Asking for a Friend is available everywhere. So it's Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Asking for a Friend.
Yes. And I cannot recommend you enough. Again, thank you for being in that spot for us midlifers.
Well, and you do a fantastic job. I love your podcast. And I actually started following some of your guests after the podcast because I loved who you had on the show. So I think, well, that's how it's supposed to work. But yeah.
Yes, no, definitely. I just shouted out Heather Finley the other day after I listened to your podcast with her.
Oh, yeah.
Dietitian, gut health for our listeners right now, but she was wonderful. And again, another one that I could just sit and take notes again and
Oh,
again
yeah.
and again.
She's really good.
Yeah. Again, I just want to thank you for your vulnerability today and this open conversation. This was meant to be this, just fun and expose individuals to different thinking patterns. If you feel like we missed anything, or if you felt like there was one thing that you're kind of hoping and praying that our community heard today, what would that look like?
Oh, gosh. I think I really want women to not feel badly about putting themselves first. It is okay to prioritize your health and your wellness and your emotional needs. We have spent a ton of time focusing on other people, and this time of our life can be a time of great discovery and really could be really our best years. But you have to define what you want that to look like. And the first step is prioritizing yourself.
And sounds easy to some, maybe hard to some. I don't know. I think it depends on like how we grew up in that, but so important. Don't lose yourself as a midlifer. You have so much
Exactly.
still. Thank you. I really
Thank
appreciate
you,
you and your time.
Lindsay. Thanks for having me today.